Hey folks, so in this lecture, we're going to be talking about the types of sources that we can utilize in research and how to find them. The first type of source that we can use is something called a primary source. You probably have heard uh, the term primary source before, so this is probably a review, but primary sources are pieces of evidence that we find throughout history, whether they are original records or objects that were created by participants or observers at the time of the event that is being called into question. So these could be memoirs, or they can even be oral histories, they could be newspaper clippings. All kinds of things can become primary sources. So some examples of that are letters, manuscripts, diaries, journal entries, maps. Interviews can even be considered a primary source as well, depending on where the interview is coming from. Certain kinds of photographs, even audio and video recordings can be considered primary sources if we are looking at how that audio or video is documenting an event of some kind. To an extent, maybe some research data could be considered primary sources, especially if you are the original researcher that is accumulating said data. There's a lot of ways that we can leverage primary resources and primary sources in research. Uh, they are not the gold standard for the types of sources that we could use in research, but they definitely have their place. Where could you find primary sources? You can look in the National Archives. UCSC has a special collections and a digital collections that hosts primary sources. So those are really great places to take a look at. The California Digital Collections is a really great place to look for primary sources. Whenever you were looking at references pages or works cited pages, there might be references to primary sources in the references or works cited. So those are always really great places to kind of backtrack and find primary sources, newspapers, autobiographies. A lot of special collections and digital libraries will have open access to these materials, especially if you are a student of a university, but special collections and digital libraries are actually open to the public. It's a service that is provided by the university to the public. So you don't necessarily have to be a student to leverage a special collections at a university library. You can just be somebody who's interested. But of course, it's a lot easier for you to navigate that information if you are a student of that university. But if you are interested in learning more about special collections and digital collections from any state, whether it's North Carolina, California, I have a lot of information on how to access those things. So just let me know. But a great place for you to always start is within your own university collections. But if you look at other university collections and you want access to those things, you can always just email the archivist and the special collections director, and they'll happily send that information over to you. The other type of source we can use is a secondary source. This is considered the gold standard of type of sources that we can use in research. And a secondary source is information that somebody has collected or created by somebody who did not experience a firsthand event of some kind. So if I am a researcher and I'm conducting research, then any information that I collect from participants or that I research that I gather from other articles, that is considered secondary research. I did not have firsthand experience or I did not participate in an event, rather I'm gathering data about it. These are often going to be the sources that are published in academic journals, which is why they are considered the gold standard, because it's not biased from having experienced that event, and it's gone through a rigorous peer review process. But it's also just important to note that like a lot of these things have overlap. But for the purpose of our design your own project, being able to identify when you are looking at a secondary source versus a tertiary source, which we'll talk about in just a second, being able to differentiate between the two is going to really help you figure out what kinds of sources that you can utilize for our project. Some examples of secondary sources are scholarly books. So those are anthologies or maybe textbooks that have been curated by a series of editors. Maybe the scholarly books is like a collection of edited essays around a certain topic. Peer-reviewed journal articles. So when we say peer-reviewed, that means that somebody has submitted their article for publication and it has gone through a rigorous multi-step peer review process to make sure that it aligns with the journal and the discipline. We can also look at encyclopedias as examples of secondary sources because it's not talking about firsthand experience of event, rather it's removed from the event and it's just sort of reporting on the event. We can also look at histories, whether they're biographies. So an autobiography would be an example of a primary source, but a biography of somebody would be considered a secondary source. Any sort of criticisms or commentary. So if I watch a movie and then I write a film review about it, that's considered a secondary source. Some ways to find secondary sources, you can obviously use the UCSC library. We use EBSCO. You can look at anthologies or edit editions, whether they're physical or digital, Google Scholar, JSTOR. There's a lot of ways to track down secondary sources, especially ones that are peer-reviewed. Then you have tertiary sources. And a tertiary source, there's nothing wrong with utilizing a tertiary source, but the reason why it's not considered a good standard for research purposes is that it's too far removed from the event itself. So a tertiary source is more like a consolidation of already published primary and secondary sources. So it doesn't really add anything to the conversation. It doesn't have any sort of additional interpretations or analysis. It's just kind of summarizing what has already been said. So tertiary sources are useful in research because it can give us maybe some background information about something, especially if we're just sort of in the brainstorming stages of research. But they're not providing anything new to the conversation. It might have some sort of general knowledge or maybe even sort of mainstreaming an idea, but it's not contributing consistent new ideas to an academic field. So some examples of tertiary sources is reviews of peer-reviewed scholarship. Now that might sound confusing. Peer-reviewed articles that are new ideas, new research that has been conducted, that is a secondary source. But a review of existing scholarship is not considered peer-reviewed research because it's not new research. It's reviewing what research has already been conducted. And these can be easily confused for peer-reviewed articles, but they're not. Think about almanacs or guidebooks. Think about like essay writing for dummies. There's no new thing or new idea that's being published. It's just sort of giving you a how-to. Some encyclopedias and anthologies, it depends on when it was published. So if it's a newly published encyclopedia, think within the last 5 to 10 years, that would be a secondary source because it's got new information. But if you're looking at an encyclopedia from like 1965, it may still have interesting information, but it's so far removed from the thing that we're talking about that it needed to be updated. So at that point in time, it would be considered a tertiary source. Any sort of indexes or abstracts or appendices, a lot of times what I've seen students do is they'll find a secondary source, but they'll only reference the abstract, not the paper itself. The abstract is just a quick summary of what the actual article is about. So referencing the abstract is tertiary, but referencing the article itself is secondary. Surveys, blogs, popular sources, so think like TMZ, BuzzFeed, Medium. Again, these are great ways for us to develop context around a situation and help us do some sort of preliminary research. But if we use that as our main source of evidence, it's not super helpful. Wikipedia is a great tool for that. I can't think of a day that I don't go on Wikipedia at all. Would I cite Wikipedia as like the main source where I'm getting my information? No, of course not. But if I'm in the preliminary research stages and I just need to sort of brainstorm and kind of get an idea of where I want to go, Wikipedia is a great place to start. And then you have ChatGPT and other AIs, because again, kind of what I will talk about in my lecture about AI plagiarism and ethics is that they don't, these AIs, these LLMs, they don't generate new ideas. They just borrow and copy and compile from pre-existing ideas. So it would be considered, if you cite and use AI, it would be considered a tertiary source.